The propeller hasn't stopped turning yet, but Staff Sergeant Robert Mitchell already knows the pilot is dead. It's 6:32 in the morning. April 21, 1944. Debden airfield, somewhere in the fog-soaked countryside of England. The air tastes like gasoline and wet grass. Mitchell stands beside a P-51 Mustang, watching a 22-year-old kid named James Parker walk toward the cockpit like he's walking toward his own grave. Parker doesn't know it yet, but Mitchell does, because Mitchell understands something the manuals don't mention. Something the engineers back in Ohio never had to face. Something that's been killing American pilots every single week since the Mustangs arrived in Europe. The P-51 has a heart made of glass. .1 bullet. Anywhere in the cooling system. And the clock starts ticking. 3 minutes. Maybe 7 if you're lucky. That's how long you have before the engine tears itself apart from the inside. Parker climbs into the cockpit. 14 missions under his belt. 3 confirmed kills. He's good. He's careful. He follows the rules. None of that will matter today. Mitchell has been maintaining these fighters for 7 months now. He knows every rivet, every seam, every vulnerable inch of aluminum skin. The P-51 Mustang is a masterpiece. Laminar flow wing. Single Merlin engine that screams at altitude. Range that can take a bomber all the way to Berlin and back. It's the finest escort fighter ever built, and it bleeds to death from a single wound. The problem is the cooling system, liquid-cooled. Rolls-Royce Merlin engine running on 17 gallons of ethylene glycol mixed with water. The coolant circulates through the engine block, threads through brass tubes in the cylinder heads, pools in a header tank behind the propeller, then flows down through exposed lines to a radiator mounted in the belly of the aircraft. Exposed. That's the word that keeps Mitchell awake at night. The entire system sits vulnerable to anything that comes from below. Rifle fire. Flak fragments. A single piece of shrapnel the size of your thumbnail. One puncture anywhere in that network of lines and tanks, and the coolant starts hemorrhaging. The temperature gauge climbs. The pilot watches it rise past the red line. And somewhere over enemy territory, the engine seizes. No warning. No second chance, just sudden silence where there should be the roar of 1,200 horsepower. American doctrine says stay high. Avoid ground fire. Focus on fighter escort. Use your speed and altitude to stay safe. Parker has tried that 13 times. It hasn't stopped the bullets from finding him. The 8th Air Force has lost over 500 P-51s in the past 6 months. Most weren't shot down in dogfights with Messerschmitts. Most were brought down by ground fire. By flak bursting at 20,000 feet. By rifle rounds punched through aluminum skin, severing a coolant line the diameter of your finger. Mitchell has watched too many pilots limp back to base with white vapor streaming behind them like funeral shrouds. The glycol mist catches the sunlight. Beautiful, in a way. Like contrails at sunset, but it means the pilot is dying. The engine temperature climbs. 100 degrees Celsius. 105. 110. Maximum permissible temperature. Past that, the cylinder heads start to warp. Valves stick. Pistons score against cylinder walls. The metal expands, contracts, tears itself apart. Some pilots make it back, most don't. The training manual calls it tactical error. The instructors say these pilots aren't following doctrine. They say the pilots are taking unnecessary risks, going too low, exposing themselves to ground fire. But Mitchell knows better. The problem isn't the pilots. It's the cooling system. The P-51's cooling system is elegant. Efficient. It uses something called the Meredith effect to actually recover some of the drag penalty from the radiator. The engineers are proud of it. North American Aviation designed it. Packard built the Merlin engines. Everything meets specifications. Everything is vulnerable. Every coolant line runs exposed through the aircraft structure. The header tank sits directly behind the propeller with walls made of thin aluminum. The radiator hangs in the belly intake, naked to anything coming from below. A .30 caliber bullet can puncture any of these components. A single piece of shrapnel from an 88mm shell can tear through a coolant line. Once the system starts leaking, there's no backup. No reserve tank. No way to seal the wound in flight. The coolant streams out through the hole. The temperature climbs. And the pilot has minutes to decide whether to try reaching friendly territory or bail out over France. Mitchell mentioned this to the engineering officer 4 months ago. The officer said the cooling system met all specifications. Changing the design would require re-engineering the entire aircraft. That would need approval from Wright Field in Ohio. Wright Field is 4,000 miles away. Modifications would take months. Maybe years. The pilots don't have years, they don't even have months. So Mitchell does what he can. He checks every coolant connection before every flight. He torques every hose clamp to specification. He pressure tests the header tank. He looks for cracks, for corrosion, for any sign of weakness, but he can't armor the lines. He can't add redundancy. He can't fix the fundamental vulnerability that every P-51 carries into combat. The first pilot Mitchell lost was Second Lieutenant David Chen, March 19, 1944. Chen had been in theater for 4 weeks. Mitchell worked on his aircraft every morning. They talked about California. Chen was from San Francisco. Mitchell was from Los Angeles. They'd both worked on cars before the war. They understood engines. They understood how things broke. Chen took off at 6:45 on a fighter sweep over France. He came back 3 hours later with his engine temperature gauge showing 108 degrees and a trail of white vapor visible from 10 miles out. Chen said he'd been hit by ground fire during a strafing pass on a German airfield near Beauvais. Single round. Small caliber. Punched through the belly skin and clipped a coolant line to the radiator. Chen felt the engine temperature start climbing immediately. He broke off the attack. Started climbing. Pointed the nose toward England. The engine held together for 18 minutes. 18 minutes of watching the temperature gauge climb. Watching the vapor trail grow thicker. Knowing the engine was dying, knowing there was nothing he could do except fly straight and hope, Chen made it across the channel. Made it to the English coast. Made it within sight of Debden. The engine seized 4 miles from the runway. Chen tried to glide in. He almost made it. The Mustang came down in a field 3 miles short. Flipped on its back. Broke apart. Chen died in the crash. The official report said pilot error. Should have bailed out over the channel when the engine was hit. Should not have tried to bring the aircraft back. Mitchell read the report and knew it was wrong. Chen had done exactly what any pilot would do. He tried to save his aircraft. Tried to get home. The cooling system killed him anyway. The second pilot was First Lieutenant William Morrison. Morrison was experienced. 9 kills. 28 missions. He knew the P-51 inside and out. He flew smart. He flew careful. On April 7, 1944, Morrison's flight was providing close escort to B-17s over Brunswick. They encountered heavy flak at 22,000 feet. Morrison's aircraft took a hit from an 88mm shell. The shell didn't penetrate the cockpit. Didn't hit the fuel tanks. It burst 20 feet to the left of Morrison's aircraft and sent shrapnel through the left side of the fuselage. One piece. Maybe 3 inches long. Cut through the aluminum skin and severed the coolant line running from the header tank to the radiator. Morrison called it out on the radio immediately. Coolant leak. Temperature climbing. He stayed with the bombers for another 6 minutes while they completed their bombing run, keeping the German fighters off them. Even as his engine temperature passed 100 degrees, then he broke off. Dropped out of formation. Headed west. Morrison's wingman stayed with him. They crossed into friendly airspace over Holland. Morrison's engine was running at 112 degrees. Past maximum permissible temperature. The cylinder heads were starting to warp. Morrison tried to nurse it. Reduced power to minimum. Kept the nose down to maximize airspeed and cooling airflow. The engine seized over the Zuiderzee at 8,000 feet. Morrison tried to restart. It wouldn't turn over. He set up for a forced landing on a beach on the Dutch coast. He almost made it. The Mustang hit hard. The landing gear collapsed. The aircraft cartwheeled. Morrison died on impact. Morrison's crew chief was a friend of Mitchell's. A guy named Rodriguez from Texas. Rodriguez was convinced the cooling system was the weak point. He pulled the maintenance records for every P-51 lost in the previous 3 months. 42 aircraft. 27 had been lost to cooling system failures after battle damage. 27 pilots killed because a single hit had knocked out the entire cooling system. The official reports blamed tactics. Said the pilots should have stayed higher. Avoided ground fire. Followed doctrine, but Rodriguez showed Mitchell the combat reports. Most of these pilots had been following doctrine. They'd been at altitude. They'd been escorting bombers. The flak had reached them anyway. The ground fire had found them anyway. 1 bullet. 1 piece of shrapnel, and the cooling system failed. By mid-April, Mitchell had watched 11 pilots from his squadron die. Some he knew well. Most he'd only met briefly during pre-flight checks, but he'd worked on all their aircraft. He'd signed off their maintenance logs. He'd checked their coolant levels. Tested their radiators. Torqued their hose clamps. He'd done everything by the book, and they died anyway. The sound of an engine seizing carries across an airfield. It's a sudden silence where there should be the roar of a Merlin at full power. Mitchell has heard it 4 times. Twice the pilots made it back and crash-landed. Twice the pilots bailed out and were never seen again. Every morning, Mitchell works in the maintenance area. The smell of ethylene glycol and hot metal fills the air. That smell means coolant is flowing. Engines are running. Aircraft are preparing for combat. Some of those aircraft will come back, some will come back trailing vapor, some won't come back at all, and Mitchell will be there the next morning. Smelling the same smells. Checking the same systems. Signing off the same maintenance forms. Watching more pilots walk out to aircraft that could be killed by a single bullet. On the evening of April 20, 1944, Parker comes to the maintenance area. He finds Mitchell working on his assigned P-51. Parker asks if there's anything Mitchell can do to protect the cooling system. Anything at all. Parker says he knows the risks. He's seen Morrison go down. He's seen Chin crash. He doesn't want to die because a stray round hit a coolant line. Mitchell looks at Parker. He sees the fear. He sees the desperation. He sees a kid who knows he's vulnerable every time he goes low. Every time he flies through flak. Every time he comes within range of ground fire. Mitchell tells Parker there's nothing he can do. The cooling system is what it is. The lines run where they run. The radiator sits where it sits. He can check everything. Test everything. Make sure there are no leaks, but he can't armor the system. He can't make it bulletproof. Parker says he understands, then he asks if Mitchell can at least double clamp all the coolant connections. Just in case vibration loosens something. Mitchell says he'll do it that night. Mitchell works alone after 2,200 hours. The maintenance hangar is quiet. Most of the crew has gone to sleep. The only sounds are the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. He pulls the cowling panels off Parker's P-51 and inspects every coolant connection. The header tank connections. The radiator inlet and outlet. The cylinder head manifolds. Every connection has a hose clamp. Mitchell adds a second clamp to each one. Positioned 90 degrees from the first for redundancy. It's not much. It won't stop a bullet, but if vibration loosens a clamp, if a connection starts to weep, the second clamp might hold long enough to get the pilot home. The work takes 3 hours. His hands are covered in glycol by the time he finishes. His back aches from bending over the engine, but every connection has double clamps now. Every joint has redundancy. Mitchell replaces the cowling panels. Cleans his tools. Walks out of the hangar at 1:15 in the morning. The night air is cold and damp. Somewhere in the distance, he hears the sound of engines. RAF bombers heading out for a night raid. Probably. The sound makes his stomach clench. In 6 hours, Parker will take off. In 7 hours, Parker will be over Germany, and there's nothing Mitchell can do to protect him from the single bullet that could bring him down. Parker takes off at 6:52. Mitchell stands on the flight line and watches the P-51 climb into the morning sky. 16 aircraft form up and head southeast toward Germany. Mitchell walks back to the maintenance shack and waits. The mission lasts 4 hours and 37 minutes. Mitchell hears the engines before he sees the aircraft. The formation comes back at 11:29.15 aircraft, 1 missing. Mitchell counts them as they peel off to land. He doesn't see Parker's tail number. The flight leader lands first. Then the others. Mitchell walks out to the hard stand where Parker's aircraft should have been. It's empty. The operations officer comes by an hour later. Parker had been hit by flak over the target. The formation had seen his aircraft start trailing vapor. Parker had called it out. Coolant hit, temperature rising. He'd stayed with the bombers for another 10 minutes. Covering them through the target area while his engine temperature climbed past 100 degrees, then he'd broken off. Headed west. Trying to make it back to friendly territory. The last anyone saw of him, he was losing altitude over western Germany. Vapor trail stretching behind him. Engine temperature past 110. Parker didn't bail out. Parker didn't crash. Parker just disappeared. Maybe he landed in a field. Maybe the engine held together long enough to get him down. Maybe he's a prisoner of war now. Or maybe the engine seized at 5,000 feet and Parker went in hard with no time to get out. They won't know for months, maybe not until the war ends. That evening, Rodriguez comes to Mitchell's work area. He's heard about Parker. He's heard about 6 other P-51s lost that week to cooling system hits. Point 3 pilots dead. Point 2 missing. Point 1 badly injured in a crash landing. Rodriguez says something has to change. Mitchell asks what could change. The P-51 is what it is. The cooling system can't be redesigned in the field. They can't add armor without approval from right field. They can't modify the aircraft without authorization. Rodriguez says that's the problem right there. The system isn't built to fix problems. It's built to follow regulations. Mitchell walks back to the maintenance shack and waits. The mission lasts 4 hours and 37 minutes. Mitchell hears the engines before he sees the aircraft. The formation comes back at 11:29.15 aircraft, 1 missing. Mitchell counts them as they peel off to land. He doesn't see Parker's tail number. The flight leader lands first. Then the others. Mitchell walks out to the hard stand where Parker's aircraft should have been. It's empty. The operations officer comes by an hour later. Parker had been hit by flak over the target. The formation had seen his aircraft start trailing vapor. Parker had called it out, coolant hit, temperature rising. He'd stayed with the bombers for another 10 minutes. Covering them through the target area while his engine temperature climbed past 100 degrees, then he'd broken off. Headed west. Trying to make it back to friendly territory. The last anyone saw of him, he was losing altitude over western Germany. Vapor trail stretching behind him. Engine temperature past 110. Parker didn't bail out, Parker didn't crash, Parker just disappeared. Maybe he landed in a field. Maybe the engine held together long enough to get him down. Maybe he's a prisoner of war now. Or maybe the engine seized at 5,000 feet and Parker went in hard with no time to get out. They won't know for months, maybe not until the war ends. That evening, Rodriguez comes to Mitchell's work area. He's heard about Parker. He's heard about 6 other P-51s lost that week to cooling system hits. Point 3 pilots dead. Point 2 missing. Point 1 badly injured in a crash landing. Rodriguez says something has to change. Mitchell asks what could change. The P-51 is what it is. The cooling system can't be redesigned in the field. They can't add armor without approval from right field. They can't modify the aircraft without authorization. Rodriguez says that's the problem right there. The system isn't built to fix problems. It's built to follow regulations. And while they follow regulations, pilots die. But then something shifts in the way the 8th Air Force flies missions. In late April 1944, Major General James Doolittle makes a decision that changes everything. He frees the fighters from close bomber escort. Instead of staying tight to the bombers, P-51 pilots can range ahead. Sweep for German fighters. Attack airfields. Destroy aircraft on the ground. It's aggressive. It's risky, and it means P-51 pilots will be going low. Strafing targets. Exposing themselves to ground fire, the exact situation where the cooling system vulnerability is most dangerous. The new mission profiles are called fighter sweeps. Then they're called Chattanooga missions when they focus on railroads and locomotives. P-51 pilots love the freedom. They can hunt. They can attack. They can take the fight to the Germans instead of waiting to be attacked, but the losses go up immediately. In May 1944, the 8th Air Force loses 93 P-51s. 41% of those losses are from strafing missions. Ground fire. Small arms. Light flak. Coolant systems punctured. Engine seizing. Pilots going down. The statistics are brutal. A P-51 pilot has better odds in a dogfight with a Messerschmitt 109 than in a strafing pass over a German airfield. The Luftwaffe can be outmaneuvered, ground fire cannot. Lieutenant Robert Hayes is one of the pilots flying these new missions. He survived Parker's loss. He survived Morrison's loss. He's flown 26 missions and has 5 kills. On May 19, 1944, Hayes is part of a fighter sweep over northeastern France. His flight finds a German supply convoy on a road near Reims. 6 trucks. 2 staff cars. Visible from 4,000 feet, Hayes and his wingmen roll in for a strafing pass. Hayes opens fire at 800 yards. His .50 caliber rounds walk across the road. Hit the lead truck. Set it on fire. He pulls up at 200 feet. Starts to climb. He feels the hit before he hears it. A sharp bang under his left foot. Like someone kicked the floor of the cockpit, the engine temperature gauge jumps 5 degrees immediately. Then 10. Then 15. Hayes keys his radio, took a hit. Coolant system. Temperature climbing. He levels off at 4,000 feet and points the nose west toward England. The vapor trail starts 30 seconds later. White glycol mist streaming from under the cowling. Visible to everyone in the formation, Hayes watches the temperature gauge point 100 degrees, point 102, point 104. He reduces power to minimum cruise. The temperature stops climbing at 106. Hayes does the math in his head. He's 180 miles from Debden. At minimum cruise speed, that's 40 minutes of flying. The engine manual says maximum continuous temperature is 110 degrees. He's at 106.4 degrees of margin. 40 minutes to make it home. He can do this. The temperature holds at 106 for 8 minutes, then it starts climbing again. 107, 108. Hayes pushes the nose down slightly. Lets airspeed build to increase cooling airflow through the radiator. The temperature stabilizes at 108.30 minutes to England. 2 degrees of margin. Hayes' wingman stays with him. Flying close formation. Watching the vapor trail grow thicker. At 110 miles from Debden, the temperature hits 110 degrees, maximum permissible. Hayes holds the power steady. If the temperature climbs any higher, the cylinder heads will start warping. Valves will stick. Pistons will seize. He'll have seconds of warning before the engine locks up. 70 miles from Debden, the temperature hits 112 degrees, past maximum. Hayes can hear the engine running rough. Slight vibration in the stick, cylinder heads are warping. He's running out of time. 50 miles from Debden, the vapor trail turns gray, burning coolant now. Not just evaporating, temperature at 114 degrees, engine will seize any second. Hayes calls the tower, emergency landing. Straight in approach. No time for pattern. He can see the airfield ahead. 20 miles, 10 miles, 5 miles, the engine is hammering now. Loud enough to hear over the slipstream, temperature gauge pegged at 116 degrees. 3 miles from the runway, the propeller stops turning, engine seized, sudden silence except for the wind. Hayes pitches for best glide speed. 140 miles per hour. He has altitude. He has airspeed. He can make it. He glides over the airfield boundary at 200 feet. Drops the landing gear. Touches down halfway down the runway. Rolls to a stop. The engine is silent, steam and glycol vapor pour from the cowling. Hayes shuts down the electrical system. Unstraps. Climbs out, his hands are shaking, his flight suit is soaked with sweat. He made it, but he'd been 18 minutes from dying because a single rifle round had punctured a coolant line. Mitchell meets Hayes at the aircraft 15 minutes later. Hayes shows him the entry hole. It's under the left side of the fuselage, just aft of the wing root. Small. Maybe .30 caliber. The bullet had punched through the aluminum skin. Passed through the fuselage structure. Clipped the coolant return line from the radiator. Not a direct hit, just a nick, enough to open a hole the size of a pencil lead, enough to drain 17 gallons of coolant in 18 minutes. Mitchell looks at the engine. The cylinder head on the number 3 cylinder has cracked. The valve seats on cylinders 4 and 5 have separated. The pistons are scored. The engine is scrap. Hayes brought the aircraft back, but the Merlin is destroyed. Rodriguez helps Mitchell remove the engine that evening. They work under portable lights. Unbolting the engine mounts. Disconnecting the coolant lines. Lowering the Merlin onto a stand. The header tank is empty. The radiator is empty. Every drop of coolant has streamed out through that pencil-sized hole. Rodriguez says this is the 14th cooling system loss he's seen in 6 weeks. 14 aircraft damaged or destroyed. 8 pilots dead. 3 missing. 3 injured, all because of hits to the cooling system. He says they need to do something. Anything. Mitchell says there's nothing to do. They can't armor the coolant lines. They can't add a backup system. The P-51 is a brilliant aircraft with a fatal flaw, and that flaw is engineered into every part of its design. The cooling system itself is a marvel of engineering. 2 separate systems in one radiator assembly. The primary system cools the engine itself. Holds 16.5 gallons of coolant at 30 pounds per square inch of pressure. The aftercooling system handles the supercharger charge. Holds 5 gallons at 20 pounds per square inch. Both use a mixture of ethylene glycol and water. 30% glycol, 70% water in normal conditions. The ethylene glycol raises the boiling point high enough that the coolant can run at temperatures up to 110 degrees Celsius without boiling. That's the limit. Above 110, cylinder heads begin to warp. Valves begin to stick. Seals begin to fail. The engine destroys itself. Mitchell has seen it happen a dozen times. Pilots who push past 110 degrees thinking they can make it home. The engine runs for a few more minutes. Then seizes without warning. Every mechanic knows the temperature limits. Every pilot knows them. But knowing the limits doesn't help. When the coolant is streaming out through a bullet hole, you can reduce power all you want. You can open the radiator flap to maximum. If the coolant is gone, the engine will overheat. There's no way around it. The system has no reserve. No backup tank. No emergency coolant supply. Once you start losing coolant, you have minutes. 0.3 minutes if you're unlucky, 0.7 minutes if you're lucky. The size of the hole determines how fast you lose coolant. A large hole from a 20mm shell will drain the system in 2 minutes. A small hole from a rifle round might take 8 minutes, but the result is always the same: the temperature climbs. The engine seizes. And the pilot has to put the aircraft down wherever he is. Rodriguez says other aircraft have liquid-cooled engines. The P-38 Lightning has liquid-cooled engines. Why is the P-51 more vulnerable? Mitchell explains it. The P-38 has twin engines. If one cooling system fails, the pilot can shut down that engine and fly home on the other. Redundancy. The P-51 has one engine. If that cooling system fails, there's no backup. The P-38's radiators are mounted in the booms. Protected by structure, the P-51's radiator hangs in the belly intake. Exposed to fire from below, the P-38's coolant lines run inside the booms. The P-51's lines run through open fuselage bays. Every design choice that made the P-51 fast and efficient also made it vulnerable. You can't have one without the other. The Packard Merlin engine that powers the P-51 is a masterpiece. 12 cylinders arranged in AV configuration. 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger. At 30,000 feet, it can still produce over 1,200 horsepower. The supercharger compresses the thin air at altitude. Forces more oxygen into the cylinders. Maintains power where other engines fail, but that supercharger generates enormous heat. The compressed air coming out of the second stage can be 200 degrees Celsius hotter than when it entered. That heat has to be removed before the mixture enters the cylinders, or it will detonate and destroy the engine. The intercooler system handles that job. Coolant circulates through passages in the supercharger housing. Absorbs the heat from the compressed air. Then flows to the radiator where the heat is dumped into the airstream. Without the intercooler, the engine would last maybe 30 seconds at full power before detonating. The entire cooling system is integrated. The engine coolant system and the intercooler system share the same radiator, but in separate compartments. The oil cooling system has its own radiator mounted ahead of the main radiator. All three systems depend on airflow through the belly scoop. If anything disrupts that airflow, all three systems lose cooling capacity. A damaged radiator door can cause all three systems to overheat. A clogged radiator from debris can kill cooling across the board, and a bullet through any of the three radiators can lead to system failure. Pilots learn to monitor three gauges constantly: engine coolant temperature, oil temperature, intercooler temperature. Normal range for coolant is 80 to 90 degrees Celsius. Maximum continuous is 110. Anything above that is emergency. Oil should run between 70 and 80 degrees Celsius. Above 100, the oil breaks down and loses its lubricating properties. The engine will seize from oil failure before it seizes from overheating. Intercooler temperature should stay below 60 degrees Celsius. If it climbs above 80, the compressed air mixture will be too hot and detonation will destroy the engine from the inside. 0.3 systems. 0.3 temperature gauges. 0.3 ways the aircraft can be killed by a single bullet. Pilots learn to recognize the signs of cooling system damage immediately. A sudden spike in temperature. A trail of white vapor visible from the cockpit. The smell of glycol vapor seeping into the cockpit through the air vents. That smell is distinctive, sweet, like antifreeze. If you smell it in the cockpit, you know you're losing coolant, and you know you have minutes to decide what to do. But pilots are starting to notice something. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt can take ground fire that would kill a Mustang. The P-47 has an air-cooled radial engine. No coolant. No radiator. No vulnerable lines. A P-47 can take multiple hits in the engine cowling and keep flying. Cylinders can be shot off the radial engine and the remaining cylinders will keep the aircraft in the air. There's no single point of failure. Mitchell has seen P-47s come back with cylinder heads blown off. Oil streaming from broken lines. Entire sections of the cowling missing. The pilots land. Shut down. Walk away. The engines look like they've been through a meat grinder, but they kept running. 1 P-47 came back from a strafing mission with 3 cylinders completely destroyed by ground fire. The pilot said the engine ran rough, but it ran. He'd flown 80 miles back to base on an engine that was missing a quarter of its cylinders. A P-51 with that kind of damage would have been on the ground in minutes. The P-47 is heavier. It's less maneuverable at altitude. It has shorter range before drop tanks are added. Its rate of climb isn't as good, but it can survive ground fire that would doom a Mustang. Mitchell watches a P-47 land one afternoon with over 40 bullet holes in the cowling and wings. The pilot climbs out. Looks at the damage. Shrugs, says he'd been hit by ground fire during a strafing pass. The engine kept running perfectly. No temperature issues. No loss of power, just some holes in the metal. The crew chief counts the holes. 43.6 of them hit the engine directly, the cylinders are dented. One cooling fin is broken. The engine runs perfectly. Mitchell shows the damage to Rodriguez. Rodriguez says that's the difference between air-cooled and liquid-cooled. Air-cooled engines are tougher, more forgiving. You can damage them and they'll keep running. Liquid-cooled engines are more efficient, more powerful for their weight, but they're fragile. One hit in the wrong place, and they're finished. The pilots notice, the ground crews notice. By June 1944, when the 8th Air Force assigns ground attack missions, they preferentially task P-47 units. The P-51s stay on escort duty and fighter sweeps. The missions where they can stay high. The missions where ground fire is less of a threat. It's not an official policy. It's just practical. Use the aircraft that can survive the mission. In early June, Lieutenant William Davis flies a strafing mission over France. Davis is part of the 354th Fighter Group, one of the first units to receive P-51s. He has 21 missions and 4 kills. On June 8, 1944, Davis's flight attacks a German convoy near Canpoint. 6 trucks, 3 staff cars, 2 motorcycles. They come in from the west at 2,000 feet. Roll into their attack. Open fire. Davis's rounds hit the lead truck. It explodes, the convoy scatters. Davis pulls up, turns to make another pass. He feels the hit. A sharp crack under the right side of the cockpit. Temperature gauge climbs immediately. 90 degrees. 95.100. Davis calls it out. Coolant hit. He levels off, heads west toward the coast. The vapor trail starts 30 seconds later. Thick white glycol mist pouring from the belly scoop. Temperature at 105. Davis reduces power to minimum. Temperature holds at 105. He's 90 miles from his base at Lashenden. 20 minutes at current speed. Temperature climbs to 108. Davis opens the radiator flap manually using the emergency handle. Temperature drops back to 106. He's 60 miles from base. 15 minutes. Temperature climbs to 110. Maximum permissible. Davis holds power steady. 50 miles from base. 12 minutes. Temperature at 112. Davis can hear the engine running rough. A vibration through the stick. 40 miles. 10 minutes. Temperature at 114. 30 miles. 8 minutes. Temperature at 116. The engine is hammering now, loud enough to hear over the wind. 20 miles. 6 minutes. Temperature gauge pegged at 118 degrees. Davis can see the airfield ahead. 15 miles. 5 minutes. Engine temperature past maximum. Cylinder heads failing. 10 miles. 4 minutes. The propeller starts windmilling. Engine seized. Sudden silence. Davis sets up for best glide. 140 miles per hour. Enough altitude, enough distance. He can make it. 8 miles. 3 minutes gliding. Davis crosses the airfield boundary at 300 feet. Drops the gear. Lands long, halfway down the runway. Rolls to a stop. He shuts down the electrical system, climbs out. His hands are shaking, steam pours from the cowling. He made it, but he'd been 13 minutes from dying because a rifle round punctured a coolant line. Mitchell inspects Davis's aircraft the next morning. The bullet entered through the belly skin just ahead of the radiator intake. Small caliber, probably 7.92 mm German rifle round. It passed through the aluminum skin, through the fuselage structure. Clipped the coolant return line. Not a direct hit. A grazing impact, just enough to open a hole the size of a grain of rice, enough to drain the system in 13 minutes. The engine is destroyed. 2 cylinder heads cracked. 3 valve seats separated. All 12 pistons scored from running without proper cooling. The Merlin is scrap. Davis saved the airframe, but the engine couldn't be saved. But that doesn't stop the losses. Between April and August 1944, the 8th Air Force loses 569 P-51s. 41% are lost during strafing attacks. Most of those losses are from cooling system damage. The numbers are clear, the vulnerability is real, and nothing is being done to fix it. Then in late July 1944, a North American aviation engineer named Edgar Schmud visits Debden. Schmud is the lead designer of the P-51. He designed the airframe, the wing, the cooling system. He's there to inspect combat damage and talk to pilots about aircraft performance.